And so I put my hand over the phone and I said, wait a minute, let me check the warehouse. And of course I didn't have a product. So I hung up and I went online, I called around, I found a factory in Vermont who said they'd make them for me. So I ordered the minimum amount, which was like, I think 10, 20, 50 dozen or something like that. But they were $4.95 a pair. And I really wasn't going to be able to charge that much, but nonetheless, I got them off to the Hilton. So then a little while later, I'm thinking, this is a great business. This is incredible. And a friend of mine came along and said, you know, I can get those made for you in China for 75 cents. And I was like, done. And he said, but you got to order 100,000. So sure enough, I did. And here's the product market fit. Oh, women like it. The product is not a problem. Ladies, look at this. You know, your toes come right out of here. It's called salon sock. Well, the market fit was that you had to sell these in to nail salons that are generally Vietnamese, Asian owned. They don't work in the normal way that most retailers do. They're not here in many cases legally or operating legally. And so they were like, you know, so how do you get them to the customer? Well, you couldn't. And what I found is that, yes, women wanted them if they saw them. So until about a year ago, when I got smart and gave it away to a nonprofit that I knew, I had close to 85 or 90,000 pairs of these still sitting in a warehouse that I was paying for. So you got to make sure that the market is there for it, that the product is something that they want, and that you have domain expertise. What the fuck did I know about nail salons? What did I know? But I'll tell you what, I still have a package of them in my garage. So ladies, if you want a pair, I'll get you. Look at Nancy, Angel, I got you a pair.
Great.
I got them in white and I got them in, actually there's 2 pairs right here. So next time you're at ETC,
That's an awesome
let me know.
story.
Yeah.
What do
And
they
the
sell
best
for
part-
now?
0. I just give them away. And so what I tell men, because you're going to want them too, fellas.
Yeah.
It's your wife's birthday, it's your anniversary, you go to the nail salon, you buy a card, gift card, you put the gift card and these in a little package, and bam, you got a good present, right?
Oh, my God.
Oh boy. All right. So
Okay.
Thank you for that.
that's a
Yeah.
good story, Deb. Thank you for
Okay.
starting out our conversation. Max, you get to follow up now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta follow that, Max. Sorry
It
about
was
that.
fantastic. And it's also just a really accurate founder journey, right? You,
Right.
you know, fake it till you make it. And it's actually a perfect segue into what, you know, I'm going to be talking about with product market fit today, which is, you know, a lot of times finding product market fit feels very haphazard. And you can get yourself down into these rabbit holes where you're thinking only 1 or 2 steps ahead, and it works out until you get to that next step and you realize that you have fewer and fewer options. And so,
Excuse me 1 second, I didn't mean to interrupt. I got 27 more meetings to go to. I will follow up and watch the recording, but thank you all. And this is going to be a great session.
thank you, Deb.
Take care, Deb. Thanks.
You know, you can sort of get yourself down in these rabbit holes and look, you know, only 1 step ahead, and sort of keep your head down. But if you actually pick your head up, and I use for that example, if before she had called the factory and built, you know, 10,000 units, you know, really thought through the go-to-market strategy. Who's she going to have to sell to? Why would those people buy? What's the message to get those people to buy? What's the price point for that? What's the distribution channel? You know, you're going to have to do all those things. Whatever your business is, you're going to have to message it to somebody. You're going to need a price point. You're going to need a distribution channel. So we don't have to wait until we reach those decision points to plan for them. We can actually plan for them the minute that you have a business idea. And by doing that exercise before you get down the road, you actually de-risk your entire business proposition, and you can keep yourself from wasting a lot of time or backing yourself into corners that you can only get into if you improvise your way to product market fit. So actually, it's a great story because, as I always like to say, the goal of my job is to enable entrepreneurs and founders to stop improvising their way to revenue and start getting there with intent. And frankly, there aren't a lot of schools out there. There are schools out there that say they're schools for entrepreneurship, but they're academic. They're not really built to actually help entrepreneurs, get to market. And on top of that, there aren't actually a lot of schools for people to learn how to sell and do marketing. So that's a little what I'm going to talk about today. Happy to make this conversational. Definitely. I do this workshop multiple times a week all over the world. I was just hopping off with a group from Canada doing this. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, or just feel free to reach out, and let's make it as personal, as tangible as possible. Of course, we'll have some time afterwards as well to dive in. So with that, I'll go ahead, share my screen, and talk a little bit about my company, GrowthX, and what we do. So I'm Max Mankey, founding partner at GrowthX. And GrowthX started as a seed stage venture capital fund based here in San Francisco, California. And we have a really simple worldview. We just believe that traction speaks louder than words, that entrepreneurs would be better off if they had the tools and the support and the guidance that they needed to raise capital from their customers, not their venture capitalists or high net worth individuals. And if you look at it, if people are able to create revenue, then over the long run, they end up being able to not only support themselves, their employees, share the wealth with those employees, their families, their communities, but they're also able to keep more ownership of their company and not get simply diluted over and over and over again. So, I've deployed this methodology, this product market playbook across, entrepreneurship programs, accelerator programs, business schools all over the world. And at the end of the day, the problem that I'm trying to solve is really straightforward. When you look at how companies are created, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a high growth technology company or socks for pedicures. And again, Deb's example is a perfect example. Her technology, if you will, her product worked perfectly well, but products are not the problem. If you look at the stats out there, the overwhelming majority of companies fail because of markets and people. And the way I look at that as an entrepreneur and as well as an optimist is I see that as an opportunity. At the end of the day, companies are failing at bringing their products to market because they are reinventing the wheel. They're innovating on selling. They are innovating on commercialization. People have brought products to market as long as people have been creating businesses. And a huge problem that we've seen here in Silicon Valley for a long time, but we see it out in the world at large, is that a lot of times entrepreneurs spend a ton of time, a disproportionate amount of time, on building their product, on focusing on those features, and assuming that if you build a product, the market will come to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's just not true. It just doesn't hold up. And you might think, oh, well, Steve Jobs says the market doesn't know what it wants. Steve Jobs didn't invent Apple. He was a marketer. Steve Wozniak invented Apple, right? And he needed Steve Jobs to bring it to the market and demonstrate that market leadership. So what we've created at GrowthX is a systematic approach to bringing any product or service or technology to market. Because as I said at the beginning of this, we already know the steps we're going to take. So why don't we plan on those steps and use those steps as a way for us to protect our runway, to get to market faster, to shorten the path to product market fit, and to acquire customers in a more repeatable, scalable way. And so we brought this textbook, or this playbook rather, to the world as what we call MXP Online. MXP, the Market Acceleration Program, is our internal accelerator program for the companies that we invest in. After we go through this today, definitely feel free to take a look at MXP Online. It's a full series, coached by me online, that'll take you through every single stage of product market fit. And the goal of the program is really just to be a foolproof formula, something that anybody can use in any country to accelerate product market fit. And what I've learned in doing this for the past 7 years, and this is the only thing that I've done for the past 7 years, is I've worked with entrepreneurs to take their products to market. And what I've learned is that products and markets are unique, but the path to product market fit is not. You may think that your product or your market is very specific or is very unique, so there are unique challenges to it. But at the end of the day, again, we know that in order for you to start creating a profitable business, you're going to need a pricing strategy. You're going to need to identify a customer acquisition strategy. You're going to need to create a balance between what it costs to acquire a customer and the revenue that you get from that customer. You're going to need to identify which customers to go after first. So the steps to finding product market fit are repeatable. There are business essentials built into there. And I've deployed this, personally across everything from logistics companies to airlines to med tech. We even have a robotic fish that swims around in fisheries in the Nordic regions of Europe that identifies fish populations using AI. Don't ask me to explain how it works, but what I can tell you is the business case for why a fishery should buy it. The entire process that we espouse, the entire process that we try to get founders to buy into is, instead of improvisation, let's look to the scientific community for inspiration here. And everything that we do as entrepreneurs is an opportunity for a test. A lot of the time when I'm speaking with entrepreneurs and I'm trying to make investment decisions about whether to invest in them, I'll join them for some of their calls with their customers. And again, part of that's for me. I believe that pitch decks aren't really a great form of due diligence. I believe that getting to the market is the best form of due diligence. And so I'll ask founders after they speak with their customers, they'll just go, what was the goal of that call? What was your plan? What were you trying to test? And more often than not, I don't get any answer. It was, well, I wanted to speak with our customers and see what they think. That's a really broad goal, see what they think. In fact, it's not really a goal at all. That's just asking questions, right? What we do using the scientific method is we ask questions and then we hypothesize what the answer would be. And then we design a test to try and get that designed response back. So we don't just talk to customers and share our product features and say, what do you think? And throw things up on the wall. We design a test to go, I think you are this type of customer. I think you have this type of problem. And I think I have this type of solution for you. Do you agree or do you not agree? And why or why not? And then if I can validate, now I can move on to the next part of the business. And if I can't validate it, then I've got to go back and I've got to change my test. But everything that we do as entrepreneurs needs to be focused on testing testing a hypothesis that gets us closer to something that is repeatable, that gets us closer to something that makes it easier for us to acquire the most amount of revenue for the least amount of effort, right? We want to mechanize the process of acquiring revenue, of closing customers and winning business. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to be intentionally testing every email, every pricing strategy, every conversation that we have with a customer. So an important note as we enter sort of how we grow businesses as entrepreneurs is to understand the dividing line between market development and sales and marketing. So a lot of the time, especially as I'm working with entrepreneurs for high growth, startups, they talk about the need to grow sales, scale sales, start bringing in a marketing team. And that's what you do once you already have a playbook, once you already have, let's call it a widget, right? I know if I put $1 into the machine, I can get $2 back out to build a widget, right? Well, that's sales and marketing. That's when we already have something that we can scale upon. As entrepreneurs, we're not at sales and marketing. We're at market development. We are in search of product market fit. And the only people to do this are the founders, are the entrepreneurs. We have to do those unscalable things. We have to get intimate with the process of how revenue gets made so that we can identify that friction that we're creating with our customers, so that we can understand their feelings, both positive and negative, towards our product, and so that we can create that playbook, that repeatable playbook that eventually we can bring in people to scale upon. So as you're thinking about what stage that you're at, if you're thinking about how do you grow your business, really make sure you create that dividing line between market development and sales and marketing. Again, market development is about rolling up your sleeves. It's about understanding who your customers are. It's about creating partnerships, not customers, right? Getting people who believe that feedback is a gift, it's not a criticism, who are willing to give you that feedback in return for a better product, a better experience. And I saw some people threw some things in the chat, so I'll just check it really quickly and make sure any questions. There we go. So really important that you stay focused on market development, and as you're starting to grow that business, avoid the trap of scaling too early, of saying, well, I've got a customer, I've got a few customers, so now I'm ready to scale. What you're looking for in market development, similar to product development, you're looking for signs of repeatability. You're looking for a process in sales and marketing that you can do again and again and again with less and less and less friction, that becomes repeatable and eventually scalable. So what we're going to talk about in particular today is about ideal customer profiles, right? So who should you be talking to and why? Where can I get the most amount of revenue for the least amount of effort? And I cannot stress enough how important a good ideal customer profile is. Your ideal customer profile is the most important asset for any entrepreneur. And the reason is quite simple. Your ideal customer profile impacts absolutely everything you do moving forward. Your ideal customer profile is going to inform your pricing strategy, because you're only going to price things for a specific market. Your ideal customer profile is going to inform your customer acquisition strategy, because you need to know how to get to that market and how to attract their attention. It's going to impact your messaging. You need to know how you impact your customer's life or your customer's business. And how do you message not what you do, but what you do for them? And the only way you can do that is by targeting an ideal customer profile. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have an ideal customer profile, and if you're not able to communicate to someone that they're within your ideal customer profile, then everything that you're doing is not going to be relevant. And if it's not relevant, then you're going to turn the noise way down on your product or service, and people just aren't going to totally see that fit. So can't stress to you enough how important it is for the success of your business to identify ideal customer profiles that you can eventually build upon. And again, going back to that last slide about market development is not about creating some giant scalable business for that slide that says you have a $6 billion opportunity. Your ideal customer profile is saying, who can I get the most amount of revenue for the least amount of effort from right now? And then that revenue will take me to another goal. And that revenue will take me to another goal and another market. And eventually you'll get to that process of being large enough, I mean, scale enough that you can take on a whole market. But the company that you are today, you need to focus on the opportunities that are available to you that are right in front of your face. So we create an ideal customer profile because at the end of the day, as great as our product might be, we do have to do some selling. And that can be uncomfortable for people, because especially in our society, salespeople are not exactly the most well-liked individuals. And we're trying to work on that. But what's important to keep in mind is that as an entrepreneur, you've signed up to sell. You've signed up to engage with people and get them to purchase something that you are selling. And so a really important aspect to crafting an excellent ICP, as well as eventually transacting revenue, is to have the mindset that selling is helping. You are not coming into conversations to convince anybody of anything. You are coming into conversations to seek fit and to try and help people do their job better, You are trying to help people make their lives better. You are trying to help people solve a problem. And if you can't solve a problem, or if you don't see a problem to solve, then that individual, that company, that industry is not within your ideal customer profile. And I'm going to give you the gift of saving you time from ever having a conversation with somebody who should be pre-disqualified from wasting your time. So as I said, we're not entering any conversations to sell. You're entering conversations to seek fit. People who enter conversations to sell, enter conversations feature dumping, saying, this is what my product does, and you should really like it, and we're the best at doing this, that, and the other thing. People who enter conversations to seek fit are testing hypotheses. Are you who I think you are? If you are, I think you have this type of problem. Am I right? Okay, and that type of problem has this type of impact on your business. Well, how do we solve that problem? I have some insights into that. Maybe there's a way where we can work together and build a partnership. And what you're trying to do in seeking fit is you're actually trying to learn. Selling is all about talking. Seeking fit is all about listening. And there's plenty of stats out there that say very clearly, and this has been going on for over 25 years, the best salespeople, the best entrepreneurs, they listen on average way more than they talk. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to maximize learning to minimize friction, right? I mean, and at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to match expectations with reality, because frustration is just the delta between what people expect to receive and what people actually receive. And it's very difficult to seek fit if you don't understand people's expectations and manage those expectations appropriately. So what goes into building an ideal customer profile? Well, I'll tell you, first of all, the number one mistake that I see is that an ideal customer profile is too broad. It's not focused enough. It is really an ideal company profile or an ideal industry profile. My challenge to all of you entrepreneurs is to get down to an ideal customer profile. You need to not only know the company, but you need to understand the department, where that budget's going to come from. And within that department, the individual who's going to give you that budget. And it's only when you get down to that individual are you able to ask really interesting and impactful questions. Because at the end of the day, companies don't buy anything. People do. So when you understand that people are the ones who make buying decisions, and they do that on behalf of a company, but when you understand that people are the ones who make buying decisions, you need to understand what motivates people. I don't mean that in some sort of intrinsic way or some sort of, a convincing way where we understand how people's minds work. At the end of the day, we're talking about how everybody in any type of business has KPIs. They have metrics that they're measured by. They have jobs that they're doing. More, in 2020, more so than ever, every single one of us is sitting in front of a 13-inch box with a bunch of black and white buttons on it, and they're just performing a different series of keystrokes to get their jobs done. Your challenge is to understand how your ideal customer profile leverages this computer to do their job and how you can make their job better. And part of your job is to understand the problems that are created in the way that they do their job today and the business impact of that problem. And when you get down into that customer profile, and again, not a company profile, and you get into your customer's workflow, then you're in a position not just to seek fit, but you're in a position to consult, to advise, and to be helpful, because remember, selling is helping, and to be helpful to that ideal customer profile. So there are, as many of you will experience, there are multiple ideal customer profiles out there, but the challenge is not who is Mr. or Mrs. Right, but who is Mr. or Mrs. Right now. And to determine Mr. or Mrs. Right now, there are a couple of factors you have to balance. First of all, on the market side, which ideal customer profiles recognize your problem today? Who amongst your ideal customer profiles is doing something about it? Who are the early adopters? Who are the people willing to take a risk? Who are the people willing to work with younger, scrappier startups? On the flip side, you have to look at your own business. What are you resourced to accomplish, right? Should you be selling to a Fortune 100 company if you're a 3-person team? Maybe, probably not, right? Should you be trying to sell to 5,000 companies if you're a 3-person team? Maybe, probably not, right? So you have to look at your own what we call market development budget and understand who's the right customer, not only from the market standpoint, but who's the right customer for your product today, right? Not the vision of your product, but your product today. And who's the right customer for your team, your bandwidth today. Likewise, you want to focus on ideal customer profiles that do something for you. Sales is a two-way street. Market development is a two-way street. You're developing a market so that you can start to transact revenue. And a lot of the time when I'm speaking with entrepreneurs, I just ask them, what's the purpose of your customer acquisition strategy? They say, well, I want to bring money in. That's really great, but what does that money do for you? What's the strategic plan? Why are you getting this revenue versus that revenue? Because the bank account doesn't care. It just sees numbers, right? It just sees zeros and ones and dollar signs, and it doesn't treat it any differently. But at the end of the day, what the value of that revenue does could be entirely different. It might help you reach break even, which might create an investment signal. Maybe you're not actually acquiring revenue. Maybe your market milestone is, I need 3 pilots just to prove to the market that I have a technology, just so I can get statistics and brand logos and quotes in the door. And what that'll do is enable me to start charging people. Whatever your market milestone is, that is related to your ideal customer profile. You need to prioritize those. So understanding your market milestone, understanding your resource and product limitations, and also understanding, that you need to be solving a problem that exists right now for your customers.
I just want to say, to keep this conversation going, I really appreciate that particular point, because I felt like I was really stuck in trying to figure out, like, what is the thing that every single potential customer would want for me, and I couldn't move forward until I knew that, because everything that I hear and learn about, companies is like, you gotta like find like the ability to scale, and like, what is that total addressable market? And like, so I was thinking, like, unless I can prove like right now that this is the thing that every single potential customer, would want in this way. And I felt like I had to keep going back. And so this, I feel, gives me the permission to, because I think there are some folks that I could focus on like right now. And so I like the idea of like Mr. Right Now, and kind of going there and using that as a milestone. Like, I feel like you just kind of unblock the chakra or something for me to move on.
Good. That's exactly the intent. I mean, I can't stress enough how the two ideals that you just put together, they're inherently in conflict, right? You need to do something big and scalable and reach that TAM, but you're a startup and you couldn't the two are just disconnected, right? So the goal of what we're talking about is, how do you build that bridge between, I've got a 1 or 2 or 3 person team, and eventually that total addressable market. And it doesn't happen overnight. It requires the acquisition or the accomplishment of a series of market milestones. You don't eat an elephant all in one bite. You have to take it one bite at a time, right? And so the question, the challenge for you is, how do I do that as easily as possible, right? How do I make each one of those customer acquisition strategies or each one of those ideal customer profiles as easy for me to acquire as possible? And so the filter is, I've said it before, traction, effort, delta. Where can I get the most amount of revenue for the least amount of effort? Or, from an entrepreneur standpoint, what is the absolute lowest hanging fruit? And again, I've been saying this for about 2 years right now. I think scale is the absolute worst word for any entrepreneur to hear. It forces us to do things against our own self-interest. It ties our hands behind our back. And also, by the way, it removes us from learning. It removes us from getting closer to our customers, our partners, and collecting that feedback and collecting that friction so that we can improve the process of acquiring customers. So, I'd say anytime you're thinking of the word scale, or someone puts the word scale in front of you, replace it with focus. Do the exact opposite, because and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, sort of what's our initial customer acquisition playbook. We'll get to this sort of at the end of the presentation, but it has nothing to do with scale. It has everything to do with the most unscalable things possible, because in order for you to scale, you need a couple of really tangible items. You need quotes, statistics, brand logos. You need a bunch of things that are essentially can fall under the umbrella of credibility. And so if credibility is what you need to eventually scale, then you need to do everything in your possibility to absolutely nail a few customers and own that use case. And if you own that use case, now you've got what you need to start scaling to other markets. So thank you for the input. Sort of moving on, another part of that focus is identifying people who share your worldview. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about as well. Trying to be something for everybody is an incredibly challenging thing to do. Any marketer will tell you about segmentation. You might have multiple different ideal customer profiles that kind of seem the same, but at the end of the day, human beings are individual. They recognize themselves out there in the market, and you need to resonate with that individual. So if your market milestone or your ICP is a very small segment, you focus everything on that segment, and within that segment, the people who share your worldview, because at the end of the day, not every buyer, not every ICP thinks and behaves the same. So I'll use an example. Let's just imagine I was selling a hyper fast Wi-Fi solution for the airline industry. You could finally start streaming Netflix. You could, God forbid, you could start doing Zoom calls on an airplane. That would be just another 2020 thing, I guess. Now, I might, as an entrepreneur, say, well, great, my customer is the airline industry, right? All right, so I'm going to start contacting Delta and United and Southwest and Spirit. Well, that's actually not right, because those companies don't view my worldview the same. Those companies don't view customer experience the same. They don't view technology the same. So let's just look at Delta and Spirit, right? Delta every year wins awards for customer experience. Delta every year wins award for in-flight or on-cabin technology. So they got there for a reason. They deployed budget. They don't get those awards on accident. On the flip side, Spirit Airlines doesn't even have Wi-Fi on their airline today. So I'm going to have to go to Spirit and I'm going to have to try and convince them that Wi-Fi is worth spending money on, let alone premium Wi-Fi. And that's a waste of my time, right? I have to convince somebody who doesn't share my worldview that it's good to spend money on customer experience. I don't want to do that. So think about, as you're crafting your ideal customer profile, who shares your worldview, because the people who share your worldview, it's an indicator of what matters most to you, which is the distribution of budget, right? Companies that are the best in their industry got there for a reason. They don't get there on accident. They spend money to get there. And that's what I care about. As an entrepreneur looking to find customers, I don't want to convince people of anything. I don't want to convince people to loosen up the purse strings. I want to look for people who are actively solving that problem today. And I'm going to say, oh, I'm helping people like you solve that problem. So as you're creating an ideal customer profile, as I said before, it's not a company profile, and certainly not an industry profile. You really need to identify the behaviors, the messaging of your customers, and identify those people most willing to work with you. Now, as you're crafting the ideal customer profile, it's not just as simple as creating a list of companies. You also need to pick your head up and peer into the future and take a holistic approach to identifying, or really disqualifying the ideal customer profiles that sort of rise to the top, that make the most sense, and the ones that make the least sense. An ideal customer profile is a hypothesis, but we can use several different factors to save us from testing that hypothesis over months and weeks outside the building. And we can test that hypothesis in minutes inside the building. So if I craft an ideal customer profile, and again, if I get it all the way down to an individual and their business problems, I can start to understand, okay, well, what would be a reasonable average contract value? And if I understand what the average contract value is, I can probably come up with a reasonable time to close. How long would that sales cycle be? You know, it doesn't have to be exact, but is it a week? Is it a month? If I'm selling anything over $100,000, it's probably going to be over 6 months. Well, how does that impact my current runway? And how would that impact my market milestone? Do I have the ability to wait for 6 months? No. Okay, well, that's a great ICP, but it's not relevant to me right now. So I'm going to drop it down the list. Does my market recognize the problem right now? Does my technology currently support what that ideal customer profile would want from a solution? Does that ideal customer profile require multiple salespeople or a lot of effort on my team that I just really don't have the bandwidth for? We know these questions are going to come up outside the building later on down the line when we go out and sell. So we don't have to improvise it over months out in the market. We can ask ourselves these questions with our ideal customer profile to eliminate the obviously bad fit ideal customer profiles and raise the good fit ones up to the top of our list. A part of crafting our ideal customer profile is also understanding why customers, why individuals buy. And at the end of the day, it's important to note that businesses do not buy for emotional reasons. Businesses buy for one of four reasons: make money, to save money, to create or protect a competitive advantage. And the last one is to stay out of trouble, to avoid risk and to stay in compliance. Now, customers, consumers certainly do buy for emotional reasons. Perfect example is an iPhone, right? There are plenty of phones that are cheaper than an iPhone that, you know, do email and take pictures and actually make phone calls on the rare occasion that that happens. But at the end of the day, most people buy an iPhone because all their friends text in blue and they don't want to be the one texting in green. That's an emotional decision, but a business doesn't have that luxury. A business has a P&L. They have a profit and loss statement. And every decision that they make, every purchase that they make has to be tied back to that P&L. And every one of these four reasons why a business would buy can be tied back to, can be inverted to a problem that a business has. So if I'm going to help them make money, it's because they're not making enough of it. There's an opportunity cost in the way that they're doing things today. If I'm going to help them save money, it's because they're doing things too manually. They're spending too much money to do things that they could be automating or doing more intelligently. If they're going to buy because there's a competitive advantage, I'm going to help them keep that competitive advantage, or perhaps they're slipping behind the competition, and that is actually costing them market share. Or they have a problem with compliance, and they're going to be out of risk, or they're going to be at risk of being sued. So your job is to understand how each of your features ties directly back to a problem that is economically focused. And it does not get any more complicated than that. Every product or feature, at least your main ones, has to go back into that workflow, that business impact, and the problem that you solve. And the problem that you solve has to be an economic problem that is directly related to your ideal customer profile. And your ideal customer, at the end of the day, is going to be your economic buyer. So when you're thinking about who is my ideal customer profile, you want to focus all of your attention, all of your effort, all of your energy on the person who actually controls the purse strings within any specific department. So we call that the economic buyer. And you want to make sure that's different from the economic buyer as opposed to the user buyer. Because for the economic buyer, my pitch might be, hey, I'm going to help you make money, I'm going to help you save money. But to the user buyer, my pitch might be, I'm going to make your job easier. Because oftentimes, when we see this in a lot of different places, oftentimes the benefit to the company is not the benefit to the employee, at least the economic benefit. And if you message to those two people the exact same thing, again, you're going to lose resonance. You're going to lose relevancy with those individuals. So we've talked a lot about ICP concepts. Let's talk about how you guys can actually start building an ICP. So at GrowthX, we do that using a funnel. And we start by brainstorming many ideal customer profiles, because if we create multiple ICPs and we take each of those ICPs through the exact same thought exercise, what that does is it creates data. It creates a standardized method for us to compare and contrast each ideal customer profile. And through that, we can identify which ones are strong ideal customer profiles and which ones are good, but not right now, and which ones are bad ideal customer profiles. And again, we could do this out in the market and spend weeks and months doing it, or we could do it inside the building and significantly de-risk any ideal customer profile. So we start with an ideal industry. And yes, you got to pick just one. Again, you might have the same role across multiple industries, but each industry is going to have its own language, its own lexicon, its own verbiage. It's going to have its own trends. So you really want to focus on an individual industry to start with. Once you come up with an industry, come up with ideal companies. And again, think about that example between Spirit and Delta. Come up with the companies that actually share your worldview. Come up with the companies that are early adopters, that are innovators, that are market leaders. Once you understand what companies you're looking at, identify the different departments that'll use, or better yet, purchase your product, right? Where's the actual capital going to come from? Where's that budget going to come from? And then within that department, you can start to understand and identify who are the economic buyers. Who are the people who are going to make the decision? Who is the person whose name is going to be signed on the check to purchase your product, your service? From there, once you understand the individual, you can understand their problems, their job, their metrics. And once you understand their job, their problems, their metrics, you can understand which of those you solve for. And from there, you can create a very succinct value proposition, and you can test for yourself whether or not the value proposition holds water. So let's take a look at an example. So a company from our portfolio is called Aptology. Aptology uses behavioral analytics as well as a company's sales data to create a predictive hiring algorithm that is 95% accurate. So it's a really fancy way of saying this company enables other companies to give potential employees a behavioral test. And through that behavioral test, Aptology will tell a employer whether or not someone is going to be successful in that role at that office location within that company culture. And just for a little market perspective, this isn't really a new science. Behavioral analytics have been around for a long time. I'm sure many of us are familiar with DISC profiles or Myers-Briggs or things of that sort, but those are very generic, right? If I'm an ENTJ Myers-Briggs, then they'll tell me, well, you could be a great politician or a good salesperson or a good teacher. Well, what kind of teacher? What kind of salesperson? What kind of politician? Are we talking about local government? Are we talking about federal government? That doesn't really tell us a whole lot. But if we combine behavioral analytics with the data that we have related to top performers, we can actually understand what makes a person successful in a specific role at a specific company culture, and even within specific industries. Now, what's exciting about Aptology is also what makes it a very dangerous company to invest in. This is a technology that is applicable for every business on the planet. So you might go, wow, I've got a $10 trillion TAM. Why would I not invest? Let's sign me up. The challenge, the trick is when we started investing with these guys, started working with them, that's a 5-person company. Where do you start? Where do you create a beachhead? Where do you first begin to penetrate the market? So the question that we then set out to ask for is who has the biggest pain today that we can solve for, that recognizes that problem and tries to solve for it? And the answer to start with is sales. And that's a fairly obvious place. I mean, sales is a role with a notoriously high turnover. It's a place where people make hiring decisions based almost entirely off of gut instinct, because there aren't really metrics for sales. Quota at one company does not mean that you'll hit quota at another company. There are a variety of factors that have nothing to do with the salesperson themselves or their skills or their capabilities. So we had to break it down even further. And this is a great example of just how deep you need to get into an ideal customer profile in order to make it focused and clear and coherent. So to start with, we could have looked at sales roles all across the bandwidth. Someone working at Old Navy or the Gap who's a jeans salesperson. Well, yeah, you could use Aptology for that. But the problem is that those people, they don't get paid a lot. They turn over really quickly. Old Navy or Gap, they don't make a big investment in those people. Similarly, it's not like when somebody walks out of Old Navy and they say, I'm going to quit my job. They don't take the customer relationship with them, right? The relationship is with Old Navy. Well, when we look at higher ticket value sales, we look at things like enterprise sales or technology sales, there is a relationship. There's a book of business that is built. Similarly, when you look at what it takes to train somebody, the company has to spend months and tens of thousands of dollars training an individual just so that they have the opportunity to try and prove themselves to be an effective sales hire. And the real damning stat is that the cost of a bad sales hire for an enterprise technology company is anywhere between $150,000 to $250,000. One bad sales hire, $150,000 to $250,000. The cost of a bad sales manager or VP of sales is $1.5 million. That will burn an incredible hole in anybody's pocket. I don't care if you're Oracle or Salesforce. That is a major problem that needs to be solved for. So that is what we look for, right? We're saying, okay, of all types of sales companies, of all types of sales roles out there, what are the ones with the biggest problem that we can solve for today? So we look at enterprise technology companies, high ticket value sales. From within that, we're looking at who are the ideal companies. And so we're looking at companies with at least 100 reps. So high likelihood of a decent amount of their population turning over. And we're also looking for the companies that actually win awards for best places to work, best culture, best hiring practices. Now, why would I look for the companies that are the best at hiring? If I'm selling a hiring solution, shouldn't I look at the companies that are the worst at it? Shouldn't I look at the companies with the highest turnover, with the worst Glassdoor ratings? No, because again, those companies with the highest turnover, those companies with the worst culture, with the worst Glassdoor ratings, again, they got there for a reason. And the number one reason is they're not addressing their problem. They don't see it as a problem. It's not their worldview. On the flip side, the places with the best culture, the places with the highest tenure or employee retention rate, they understand their problem. They invest in solving that problem. They've already deployed budget to do that, and they're going to continue to do so to maintain that competitive advantage. Moving down from the ideal companies, we then understand that obviously this is a tool that we're selling to salespeople or for sales teams. So sales is one of our department, and obviously human resources, being the team that hires, is another one of our departments. The leaders in those roles are heads of sales, chief revenue officer, head of HR. So now I can dive in and try and understand what are their metrics, what are their business issues. For the head of HR, it's cost of hiring. If I hire somebody and that person turns out in 3 months, I've got to do the whole process again, which immediately doubles my cost per hire. If I'm the head of sales, the chief revenue officer, then the metrics that matter to me are quota attainment, time to ramp, and turnover. So what's my value? I can reduce turnover. I can reduce the cost per hire, and I can increase quota attainment, right? And I just understand that's those people's jobs. It's not the company's job, but if I'm looking at those individuals, I can understand their job. So what's the value that I create? Well, Actology helps CROs at industry-leading enterprise technology companies increase revenue while decreasing the cost per hire through our innovative predictive hiring technology. And I am able to get all the way down to that value proposition just by doing this funnel. I just saved myself probably about a month of market development work outside of the building just by going deep into the individual roles and the titles and understanding the behaviors and the worldview of the people who would comprise my ideal customer profile. So as we sort of wrap up that ideal customer profile section, one of the things, and sort of going back to the comment earlier, one of the things that I stress to entrepreneurs I work with is to focus on the 50. There are not, in most cases, especially in at least B2B, there are not more than 50 individual human beings on planet Earth that are predisposed to working with you. There are 50 people that you should be absolutely laser focused on because they're the right buyers at the right companies with the right worldview who have the ability to purchase your product or service and work with you today. And everyone outside of those 50 is just noise. And 50, by the way, is a good number from a funnel metric standpoint to get yourself down to that market milestone of 1 to 5 customers, right? If you can convert 10%, you'll get down to about 5 customers, and you'll also build a pretty healthy pipeline. So take sort of that ideal customer profile exercise as an opportunity to unburden yourself from scale and focus on the 50 individuals who you can get really in-depth insights on and understand who you should be working with. I'll pause for a brief second answering questions. Yeah.
Sorry if anybody else had questions. I know I have lots all the time. Just wondering if you have any advice around, like, once you narrow in on like who that ideal customer is, like how to connect with them so that you can learn a little bit more. I mean, we've been doing customer discovery interviews, and my approach has been to identify like the highest level person that I can reach. I think I could probably narrow that down now using this information, but it's not always an easy thing to reach that decision maker, like that head of HR or that head of sales. And so, do you have any advice around that?
Yeah, I do. That's a really timely question. That's actually what I'm gonna get to next. So I'll pop into that, and just saw the question from Patrick. Just quickly, Patrick, the customer in that example is actually the airline, because the customer, the passenger is not buying the technology. You just get onto the airline and you have Wi-Fi. So in that example, the airline's actually going to buy the piece of hardware that enables the Wi-Fi to come in. You wouldn't charge the customers extra. But again, it's a hypothetical situation either way. So let's talk about how do you get in front of those people, because it actually is really important. What you don't want to do is spend needless cycles really working hard just to get in front of somebody. You want to try and find the lowest hanging fruit for that feedback as soon as you can. So how and where to get started? An important aspect of this is to avoid the cost of admission. And what the cost of admission is writing those emails, knocking on doors, making the cold calls that you need to make just to validate a hypothesis, right? What's the difference between a customer interview and a sales pitch? Realistically, there shouldn't be any other than a call to action at the end. Both of those conversations require you to ask questions, to seek fit, to confirm that somebody acts the way that you think that they act, and shares the worldview that you think that they share. So in order for us to avoid the cost of admission, it's really simple. We have to identify every conversation that we can get into without having to overshare about our company, without even really having to sell. So a couple of things you can do there is, first of all, that's absolutely where you want to be tapping into your network as much as possible. You want to be asking people to connect you with advisors, mentors, people who have been in the industry for a long time. They don't necessarily have to be your buyers, especially in the customer interview phase. Anybody who you can impress upon your worldview and who you can just confirm through those interviews your hypotheses, those people will have a lower sort of bar to admission. If you're doing cold outreach to do customer interviews, it's going to be very difficult to get the right types of interviews through the door. And again, you're going to have to convince people of it. And at this stage, or at least in the early stage, it's very difficult to demonstrate that doing that interview with somebody is going to be worth their time, because you're the one asking for a favor. So as best as you can, you want to, before you get to writing emails again and doing cold outreach and phone calls, things of that nature, you want to try and make sure you check off every box that requires absolutely no cost of admission. In order to propel that, you also want to make sure you're turning every conversation into more conversations, not just with that individual, right? Making sure you book follow-on conversations, but just changing your behavior and always making sure you ask, whether it's a customer, a mentor, an advisor, whomever, ask them who else you should speak to. take this another level further. Don't just ask them who you should speak to, but do the homework, see who they're connected to, and ask if you can speak to specific individuals that they may already know. So looking at their LinkedIn, looking at the professional community, whatever that might be. And if you can build a pipeline, or if you can build a Rolodex of people just through those referrals, it's so much easier, and you're going to lower the cost of learning so that you can spend more time actually selling once you've codified sort of what your ICP is, what your go-to-market strategy is. So to put that another way, you know, this is literally our customer acquisition playbook. I've run this for every single business at GrowthX that we've invested in. And it starts just with your network. Absolutely everybody in your network, everybody they're connected to, speaking with them. And I don't mean speaking with them in an unintentional way. I mean, really tapping into the right people at your network and understanding that you're going to sit down with them and you're going to talk with them and you're going to do these interviews. And it's not about scalability. It's about learning. You want to maximize learning to minimize friction. And as you go through these interviews, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. I mean, I always use this example of the importance of an ICP when doing these interviews and the importance of using that scientific method, right? If I have two founders, founder A and founder B, and each of them go into this week and they have 10 meetings, 10 interviews, right? Founder A has 10 interviews with 10 people who are in completely different ICPs, and founder B has 10 interviews with people who are all in the exact same ICP. Well, what's going to be their experience halfway through, 5 meetings in, right? Founder A, his head's going to be spinning. He's going to be going, well, this person is this product feedback. This person says that, you know, the product should cost this much, but the other person says it should cost this much, right? Feedback is coming from all over the place because the audience, the people they're testing, the population is different, right? So there's no clear signal. And similarly, that founder doesn't know what exactly his audience is reacting to. And so there's nothing that founder can do to take from one conversation and improve upon it to the next. On the other side with founder B, she's 5 meetings through. She's got another 5 meetings ahead. She has a consistent pattern of what people are responding to and what people are responding negatively to. And likewise, she now heads into her next 5 meetings being able to consult, being able to say, you know, over the past week, I've spoken to some of your peers, and what I'm hearing is this true for you? And so she's able to refine that pitch and get it closer and improve the outcome from meeting 1 to meeting 5 to meeting 10, so that it becomes easier to turn those from interviews into sales. It makes it easier to turn those into, well, I'm not really sure what you do. Tell me about it too. Oh, you know what? This is great. This would be a great solution for another person who's a friend of mine. So really being intentional in not just who you talk to, but the process in doing that and making sure you're getting a clear signal from a sort of a homogenous group. Once you're into your network, the next thing you want to do is you want to reach out to the network of your network, right? The network of your referrals. And that's the highest ROI that you're going to get outside of your own network. It's the easiest people to earn the right to pitch towards. There's very little cost of admission here. And the cost of admission typically is just an email. Hi, so-and-so, I want you to meet this founder. I spoke with them last week. I think this would be a really good conversation. And that's all you need. The thing about what you need to do in order to get in front of somebody else, you know, hi, I'm the founder of such and such. We're helping people do, here's my value proposition. We've done this much in revenue. I looked up your thing and it looks really interesting. And hopefully you'll respond to this email, and they won't. And then you have to write 3 more emails, right? If you can just get someone to refer you along 1 email, you don't even have to earn that meeting, then you'll be able to significantly accelerate your path to market, your path to those market signals. Next, you want to start building upon your customers. And once you have those customers, and I alluded to this earlier, you want to get incredibly intimate with the process of how your customers are using your product and how you can make them successful. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build, or you're trying to subsidize future marketing costs to scale. So what you're trying to do with those customers is you're trying to get them to become referrers. And that can be in a number of different ways. Again, I've alluded to it before: quotes, case studies, statistics, testimonials, whatever that might be, brand logos on your website. because those are the things that you're going to need to eventually be able to do successful marketing and sales, that cold outbound, the things that are the lowest ROI, that take the longest time to perform, if they perform at all. But again, where you really want to start with those customer interviews is, you want to start with the lowest hanging fruit, and you want to avoid doing anything that is not the lowest hanging fruit until you absolutely must. And part of your market milestone is that when you get to doing that cold outreach, when you get to, earning those conversations through the cost of admission, that you're properly armed to do so. And just to sort of wrap up that thought, what are the best ways to earn those conversations in a very tangible and practical way? The first thing is, again, to be intentional. And I've talked about this before, understand who you're reaching out to. Why are you reaching out to that person? And why is that conversation relevant right now? You want to try your absolute best to avoid improvising and and don't be sure not to miscalculate the cost of improvisation. Having conversations that go nowhere, that lead to no outcome, that you're not sure what the purpose of that call is, that's a drag on your runway. That's a drag on your time. That's time that takes you away from spending it with somebody who actually is in your ideal customer profile. Another important strategy here is persistence. I can't tell you how many times I work with founders who mistake no response as a personal no. You reach out to somebody with your pitch deck, or you reach out to somebody, asking for a favor, and you hear no response. Say, well, they must not have been interested. No, that's absolutely not the case. I have no data to support that, and I prefer not to bring feelings to a data fight. I'll tell you a story from our portfolio. I was working with a founder. We were trying to get a deal done with Salesforce. We had done our homework. We knew that Salesforce was a perfect, on paper, a brilliant, perfect fit ICP client of ours. And I set the founder up to be doing this outreach to a person who was exactly the right title and department they want to reach out to. And after 5 or 6 emails, he didn't hear back, and he just gone, Max, obviously they're not interested. I said, how do you know it's obviously not interested? He said, well, he hasn't responded. I was like, hasn't responded? We are 3 months out from Dreamforce, which is the largest event in San Francisco, let alone the largest event for Salesforce. And he's the head of Dreamforce. He's busy. So it's our job to stay in front of him. He said, I don't want to do this. I said, listen, if we get this deal, how much do you think it'll be worth? He said, oh, well, it'll easily be worth $500,000. I said, okay, so you think that you don't have the time, or it's not worth your energy to write 1 more email or 5 more emails for an opportunity that's $500,000? Said, no, I just don't think it makes sense. Said, great, I'll take it over for you. 5 emails later, what do you think happened?
Oh,
I didn't get any response, but until the 5th email, he responded, thank you for following up. I've been totally swamped with Dreamforce. We only have a month to get something done with you guys before the festival starts, but I need to do it because I'm in love with your product. At the end of the day, that contract was worth $750,000, and it only cost me 10 emails. I cannot stress this enough. Persistence wins out. Don't take no response personally. Similarly, no is the second best answer, right? I would rather get to no quickly, assuming it's a qualified no, than be in the business friend zone where somebody is interested, right? How many of you guys have had that conversation where you get on a call, you do your presentation, you do your demo, and then people say, well, this was really interesting. I really appreciate it. Send me some more information, and I'm going to share it with the rest of the team, and we'll get back to you. They never get back to you, right? That's the friend zone. There's nothing to do there. You didn't get to a yes, you didn't get to a no. And it's our job as entrepreneurs to push people to at least an outcome. Get me to a yes or get me to a no. And as long as I'm not in one of those buckets, I'm going to be persistent. It's one of the few tools that are free that I have. I'm going to be persistent to push the buyer to get me to that to get me to that decision point. And I'll just a quick email hack there. I couldn't tell you why it works, but I'll tell you it works. It works like a charm. If you haven't heard from someone you know, over 3 or 4 emails, starting off an email, replying to the thread that you've been on with, "Hi, first name, pardon my persistence," and then just continue with whatever else you were going to write. Can't tell you why, but it works really well. You know, to that extent, you know, just going back to why cold outbound is really difficult and why the cost of admission is way higher than you think. Within the sales development community, within the lead gen community, if I want to earn a conversation with a business decision maker, with an economic buyer, currently today, the average across most industries, in order to earn an introductory conversation, requires 15 different touches over 16 days. So that's email, call, LinkedIn, right? Day one is actually all 3 of those. So think about if you had 100 people you wanted to reach out to, right? 100 people on your ICP. Do you have the time and the tools and the expertise to run a 15 touch campaign over 16 days times 100? Do you even have the resources to do that right now times 2 or 3? I'm telling you, because this is where I cut my teeth, you don't. That's left for professional marketers and salespeople. It is incredibly difficult to set those up, which is why you want to be as, and this brings me to my next point, you want to be as personalized as possible. You have to be persistent to earn the right to that conversation. Those are table stakes. But if you want to get in front of the right people for the right reasons, you need to be personalized. And those personalized conversations are going to yield such better results than taking a spray and pray approach, than building a list of 5,000 people and just going and shooting it out there and taking a bunch of meetings that'll do nothing else other than eat up your time. Unqualified time gobblers who will just sit there and you go, that wasn't really a fit. And by the way, make no mistake, the people who are unqualified, they're going to give you unqualified product feedback. They're going to give you unqualified market feedback, and they're going to pull you away from the ICP that you spent all this time building. My last hack is to follow up quickly in every instance at every stage of the funnel. There are plenty of studies out there that show that when you spend all this time and effort reaching out to somebody and they finally respond to you, if you don't respond within minutes, if not a handful of hours, by the time you do respond to them, let's just say 12 hours or 24 hours later, it's almost as if they never responded to you before. That's what the half-life is right now. That's how busy people's inboxes are, how distracted they are with everything going on social in the world and absolutely everything. If you're going to do all this work to earn that conversation, don't lose that conversation by letting it sit in your inbox and doing anything else. Drop what you're doing. Put the Chipotle down, pick up the phone, immediately respond to that email. It's the easiest behavior you can do to keep things moving. And on the flip side, don't chase silver bullets, such as, it's the subject line that got me in front of, the subject line or the call to action that got me, $500 million. Those are all contextual. There's more going on behind the scenes than you know. And it's so much better time can be spent by personalizing and getting in front of the people who are the lowest hanging fruit, have the highest likelihood of closing and doing business with you. So that's sort of the high level hacks that I have for all you guys. I mean, there's a lot more information. As you can see some of the topics that we covered here on MXP Online. It's not limited to ideal customer profiles, but that's really the most important thing for any of you. And focus is a good thing. There's freedom in focus. When you're focused, you're freed, you're unburdened from having to worry about being something relevant to everybody. And you're able to reduce the size of that funnel, and you're able to focus on personalization. You're able to get in front of the right people for the right reasons and have thoughtful, intentional conversations. And the way that we deliver that is through MXP Online. So thank you guys all for listening. I know I'm way over, and John, tell me when and if we need to stop. But I'd love to answer any questions for any of you, and absolutely looking forward to learning more about what you all are doing.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, everybody here has their own schedule and, can determine their own level of relevance on this. I felt like today was, so I've had a lot of conversations with everyone in our cohort, right? I'm talking to everybody pretty regularly. And some of the things you said today are so timely to be said, right? I mean, everyone on this call can shake their head and say, yeah, you're right. I should focus. I should do this. I should do. So the other thing is, I think that the group, really quickly came up with a new T-shirt campaign. Don't bring feelings
Love
to
that.
the
I
data
love that.
fight. That was like the best quote of the day, right? So I wrote it down immediately. Patrick put it down before I could even finish typing it, and then Angel jumped in too. It was like so quick, so perfect. And we so often do those things, like bring feelings into the conversation. So there's a lot of different questions that can be had. I think what I like to do is defer to the group to ask their own questions. I could have an interview with you for another hour, just sort of picking on what you've already said, but I don't want to, presume what, Muhammad or Patrick might say or want to say in terms of their own approach to the needs of their company. But I would encourage us to take this time, folks. Let's, we're the only ones on this call. let's ask the questions we need to ask. As I said to you before, one other thing I wanted to share is that, as you just learned, Max is the founder of a venture fund that they've invested in, I think over 40 companies.
Yep.
And he is looking to establish relationships with entrepreneurs just like you, to see whether or not there is an opportunity for his firm to invest in companies like yours. And so this is a personal journey that they will, how many VCs come in or asked to come in and just give you those kind of insights that you just got today. This is about establishing relationships.
Back from a search.
And this is about establishing relationships and taking advantage of this. So today is the first day in that relationship. And I encourage all of you to explore it with a gentleman and a team that's interested in exploring it with you. So having said that, that's all I want to say for now. I open the floor up for questions.
The other thing I wrote down was traction speaks louder than words. So we're gonna have to add that to the t-shirt campaign. But I did want to know, as you were talking about customer discovery calls, you talked about stuff like pricing and things that would be like specific to the company. And I wonder, well, my question is, should we be asking those kind of very specific questions? Because I thought like if people felt like you're trying to sell them, right now, that they would be less willing to have those discussions with you. And that feels, or it could just be my own discomfort with like sales. But any thoughts about that you could share?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, again, there really shouldn't be much of a difference, tactily speaking, between a customer discovery call and a sales call. I mean, a sales call is an interview. You are trying to identify if this person, if this company is worth your time, is an opportunity worth chasing down. So, part of that certainly is discomfort in wanting to ask people uncomfortable questions. But part of that also is just about setting expectations, right? Right off the bat, you need to be in control of those conversations and set the expectation about what you're looking for and how the person on the other side of the phone can be helpful to you. So as it relates to pricing, if you're doing customer interviews or customer discovery and your goal is not to sell, I wouldn't say my goal is not to sell, because that just takes that off the plate for you. But I would say, I'm really just looking for feedback. I believe that feedback is a gift. If my baby's ugly, please tell me. And here are some of my hypotheses. And I'll tell you, a lot of people are actually really excited to, especially as it relates at least to technology, a lot of people are really excited to be interviewed for things such as, hey, I'm developing a new tech company, and I'd love to pick your brain about it. I see that you're kind of a leader about it. Because at the end of the day, people kind of like to go to a cocktail party on the weekend and say, well, I was just interviewed for this cool technology company. So that is certainly an approach to sort of disarm people. But make no mistake, at a certain point, you'll need to start asking about pricing. But rather than asking about pricing, I would rather have a conversation validating my hypotheses around value. So we talk about pricing, but the pricing needs to get reverse engineered through the value that you create and the problem that you solve. So a great example that I always use when talking about pricing is this company that created something called Trailer Tails. And I'm sure we've all seen it at some point. There are these plastic, flimsy looking tails that go in the back of freight trucks, that go in the back of cargo and freight trucks. And they look kind of silly, and they cost a good amount of money. And what they do is they just make the back of cargo trucks a little bit more aerodynamic. So when a truck is driving down the road, it creates a negative air pocket right at the back of that truck. And that air pocket actually pulls the truck backwards. So the engine is working harder than it needs to move forward. Well, okay, so I'm going to create these little plastic fins that certainly don't cost more than $100 to make. And I'm going to sell them to, a truck driver. I could sell them to a truck driver, or I could sell them to a truck fleet manager. And so what's the value that I create? Well, let's understand what's the problem that I'm looking for. A fleet manager has 100 trucks, and their job is to make sure that 100 of those trucks are on the road at least 300 days a year, right? And those trucks are on the road 18 hours a day. And so 300 days a year, 18 hours a day, times the cost of fuel. So now let's talk about what the product does again. Let's go back to it. Does the product make trucks more aerodynamic? No. Trailer Tail reduces fuel costs, right? Is that literally what it does? No, it impacts wind and does make things, but the value proposition is we help truck fleets save money by increasing fuel efficiency 3 to 5%. Now, what's the value? If I take 100 trucks times 300 days times 18 hours a year times the cost of fuel, and that's their fuel budget for the year, and I shave 3 to 5% off of that, that's a big number. Now I'm not having a pricing conversation. Now I'm having a value conversation, right? And so how do I turn that into a discovery call? I just take everything that I stated as a fact and I turn it into a question. So how many trucks do you have in your fleet? Okay, and what's the biggest cost to running those trucks? And what's the hardest cost for you to try and cut? And by the way, I know the answer to those questions. I just want to and again, this goes back to hypotheses-driven questions. I just want to hear them answer the question I expect them to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so what if I reduced your fuel costs 3 to 5%? What would be the impact? That'd be unbelievable. I'd have all this budget left. Then you go, okay, with all that budget, I can now create a pricing that is, 10x what it costs me to build it. But it's 1% of the savings that I'm creating for you. Does that make sense?
Yep. That's perfect. I'm glad we're recording this.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to distribute this, and there's things that you've said before. Let me ask you a question, if I could, Matt, just to, from a different perspective. So let's say that we have companies in this cohort that, part of the challenge is finding the right revenue model or identifying the revenue model. There's like concepts. Remember, this year, our program was seeking entrepreneurs that were going to help solve problems in the city, right? That this was a real focus. And so it wasn't always a sprint to profitability as much as maybe a marathon, a service, or other things that In fact, there were 30 plus nonprofits that tried to get in and had wonderful ideas about improving life, health, safety, welfare for the city of Baltimore, and then by extension to other cities. So a company says, I'm looking for this, and I have 5 different things I could do. I got 5 different possible activities I can pursue. As an investor, when you're looking at a startup like this and has multiple ideas they can pursue, how do you view it? How do you evaluate the team, and what advice could you give to us to say, use this mind trick or use this process to identify where to focus? Because part of the customer discovery process is focus. And so if you've got 5 things to focus on, then that means 5 times customer identification phone calls and discovery calls for each one of those revenue models or potential revenue streams. We're at that stage. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, this is where the phrase traction speaks louder than words comes in. And I'll use aptology as an example. You know, having multiple options is not a good thing, it's a bad thing, because multiple options is not a problem that more venture capital can solve. This is where the work of market development comes in. You can have a lot of ideas about what those business models, about what those revenue models are, but that usually is a signal to me that somebody has not yet gone to the market, has not yet tested those models. And that is what, you know, really a lot of investors are looking for is, listen, you can tell me that you failed, you can tell me that you're successful. Just tell me you've done something other than a business model. I'll tell you, you know, one of the things that drives me nuts here in Silicon Valley is, you know, somebody comes out of Stanford GSB, they know everything about building an amazing business model. And then you say, okay, so what's the proof of all this? And there are no data points, right? Not interviews, but absolutely no one has actually validated this. You say, okay, so you have this business model. What's your plan to actually validate one of them? Or it's like, okay, so you have 5 business models. Which one of them are you going with and why? That's the signal, you know, at least that early, that I want to look for, because all you've done is you've done a really in-depth brainstorming session. So then let's talk about those business models, right? Because again, everything in market development, everything in product market fit, we can be planned for. It's standardized. You know that you're going to create a revenue model, that you're going to need a pricing model, right? And your revenue model is going to be based off of the delta between what an average contract value is and the cost to acquire a customer, right? So you need to have both hand in hand. And guess what? Both of those are related to an ideal customer profile, which has a business problem, and that business problem has a dollar amount to it. And you can charge a certain percentage of the dollar amount that you save that business or that you help them earn, right? Now, as far as how you structure the revenue model, I can certainly give a couple of pointers on that. Just first of all, you know, you want to sell the way that people are used to buying. Again, there's no need to innovate on commercialization. There's no need to innovate the way that people are buying. I think one of the things that people over innovate on is trying to highlight how different, how innovative they are. You don't want to be overly innovative. You don't want to freak people out as being disruptive is a great word for investors. It's a terrible word for customers, especially businesses. Businesses want nothing to do with disruption. They don't want anything disruptive on their balance sheet, right? So you want to save the disruption and the innovation for your product or service. And when you get to the person who's the economic buyer, and when you get to their accountant, you want it to be frictionless. You want that revenue model to be the same revenue model, the same cost structure that they're used to with all your other vendors, which gets me back to actually doing a thorough competitive analysis. This is something we talk about in MXP Online. You know, you want to look and act like your neighbors. You don't want to be sticking out like a sore thumb as far as you know what your competition looks like. You want to be able to say, this is how I'm different, right? But you also have to acknowledge that your customers know who your customers or know who your competition is. Your customers have been marketed to them. So now when I say they've been marketed to them, they've been educated, they've been trained, they've been brainwashed, right? To understand your solutions in a certain box already. It's going to take a lot of work to break that box down. But instead of doing that, fit nicely in that box, get somebody to sort of, if you want to talk about a mind trick, John, like trick them into jumping in thinking that you're one of the bunch. And then once you actually have them in, you've earned that conversation, then you can begin to slowly enlighten them that you do things in a different and interesting way, but not so different that it's going to be impossible for them to wrap their heads around how to do business with you. That makes sense?
Yeah. I have a question. I noticed a couple of places in your presentation you advised to not get personal, stay away from an emotional analysis. And yet, as I consider, most of our business is dealing with social impact, and the fact that your final screen talked about analog hacks that actually end up sealing the deal essentially. And I know that you could probably develop data or metrics for those, but the bottom line is what undergirded them was sort of a intuitive and emotional sense of what you need to do next to make this thing pop into real business. So, and even when you talk about the Android phone versus the iPhone, and that the iPhone user is an emotional user. So I'm trying to manage what seems to be, night and day, with the fact that I at least feel that we have to bring a certain amount of emotional awareness, especially when we're dealing with, at least in our case, an underserved market and often a marginalized market. And you can crunch a bunch of data and the data says you need to go this way. And yet when you get right down to it, to getting a community of one or of many to make a shift to your particular business idea, where oftentimes the misstep is you crunched all the data said they should have went for it, and they're not going for it.
Mm-hmm. So to touch on a couple of great points there, first of all, where you want to remain unpersonal is in viewing the data or viewing the experiences.
Okay.
So a really important piece of advice, and one of the ways that we've structured the program is, again, sort of basing off the scientific method. Before you do something, whatever it is, you plan on how you're going to do it, and you create the vehicles for you to capture information afterwards, right? So the typical journey is you go in, you speak to people, you're not really sure what the outcome would be. You come out of that meeting, you're with your co-founder or with your coworkers, you're like, that was really great. That was awesome. Did you hear them say this? Did you hear them say that? Yeah, that was awesome. We should do something about that. And then you walk into the restaurant and you go, so what are you having for lunch? And how's your spouse doing? Right. And all that's data to me. Those aren't numbers, but that's data to me. And that data is flinging off your business every day. So what every business can do right now is be intentional about capturing those insights, be intentional about not letting soft data, hard data, numbers, anecdotes fly out of there. And also be intentional about capturing it on the front end. I'm going to ask a question to this person that I also asked to the 3 previous people, and I'm going to capture what each of them said, and then I'll be able to compare it. So that's kind of how we like to talk about running a data-driven business, is standardizing our methodologies and our processes across the board so that we can look at information, even if it's not hard data, we can look at it across a population and go, okay, here's what it's actually speaking to me. It's not my feelings, right?
Sure.
Now, on the other side, working with your customers, absolutely, you need to be personal with it. The most important tools in order to develop a market and be successful at bringing your product to market are business acumen, curiosity, and empathy.
Mm.
If we cannot sit in our customers' shoes, if we cannot understand how they do their job, the pain points in doing their job, how they are measured in doing their job, we do not stand a single chance at successfully not selling to them, but helping them. So there's an enormous amount of EQ involved in developing a market and identifying our target market, because again, everybody in every position has metrics, whether you're the CEO or the lowest person on the totem pole. There's a way that our job is measured, and our job is to figure out, how does our product or service improve those measurements, right? And what are those target metrics? And a great way for you all to be able to validate, or at least the homework that you're doing, and sort of go, am I close to the right path, is just Google top trends or top priorities for, and then enter in the title of the role of the person that you're targeting. And what you're going to get is, you're going to get 2 or 3 pages of blog posts on Google from industry experts that are going to tell you, like, here's the things that, you know, chief revenue officers care about in 2020. And if you're doing this work well, if you've really identified your ICP well, you should see the problem that you solve come up in the first 3, in the first 5 or so of multiple lists. And if you don't see that, then that's a signal. That's a signal that maybe you're not in the right market. Maybe you're not in the right place for it. But all of that comes back to, you absolutely have to be able to remove yourself from the product, and you have to start from the customer's perspective, sit in their shoes. I mean, this is what I'm talking about with keystrokes. All of us are just sitting here doing this. We need to use empathy and business acumen and curiosity to ask people, how do you do your job? And what's the problem with doing that job? And how do I make that job more effective? I mean, let's use Aptology as an example, right? So what did their life look like before, right? Before they have this technology? Well, I'm a recruiter, right? Okay, so I get 1,000 inbound resumes. There's no way I'm going to read all those resumes. So I'm going to make a variety of biased decisions based off of names and universities and cities. And all of those decisions are entirely gut feeling related, right? Because there's no hard data on anyone's resume. There's very little hard data, at least on anyone's resume, especially for hiring salespeople. So they're going to spend 80% of the time taking a list of 1,000 resumes and whittling that down to 100, right? Very low value activity, very low accuracy, creates a bunch of 100 interviews that they have to do. And those 100 interviews, they don't even know exactly what they're interviewing for. They're just confirming the information on the resume. And again, they're going to make a gut decision based off of another gut decision. And all this does is it leads us to imperfect hiring solutions. Okay, so that's what your life looks like before you have this tool. Now, if I give you this tool, here's what happens. You get 1,000 people who take a test, and instantly those 1,000 people are whittled down to the 50 people who are, with 95% accuracy, predisposed to be a top performing employee, right? It's like, so now I actually have data that tells me the cream of the crop. I don't have to read a single resume. I only focus on having interviews with 50 people. And because I'm not interviewing 100 people, those interviews can be much more meaningful. I can go deeper, right? I can understand those individuals better. And so I have a higher quality interview with higher quality applicants. And what does that lead to? Better employees and a better use of the hiring manager's time. And oh, by the way, now I've also just increased their capacity, because now instead of dealing with 100 interviews for one job, I've got 50. And so I could do 2 jobs at once. So now I can increase my hiring plan. What's the business impact there? And I can only do all of those exercises by just asking myself, what's the role of a hiring manager? What are the keystrokes? How is that person managed? Quality of hire, cost per hire, time per hire. Okay, so I understand those metrics. What goes into those metrics? And you have to do all that work in order to be able to empathize with your customers and explain to them the only thing that matters. I mean, what's everyone's favorite topic? You know, science would say it's themselves, right? So it's so important to not communicate what you do or what your product features do. Everything that you communicate needs to be what you do for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only way you should speak to your market is this is not what I do. This is what I think I can do for you. And I just want to figure out whether or not this makes sense or not. That's interviewing, that's selling.
How do you map that onto the venture capitalist platform? Like when you're evaluating businesses. So I'm listening to you talk about the hiring process. And as someone who's evaluating business, hundreds, maybe thousands of businesses, my sense is that you've developed a kind of filter for how to know, probably within 30 seconds, if you're listening to somebody, you need to listen to some more. How long does it now take you to surmise that you're talking to somebody that might have an actual viable business and maybe you want to talk to them further?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like everything, I try to reverse engineer it. What am I looking for? Well, my worldview, as I said, right off the bat, is that traction speaks louder than words. So I can look at demo days, I can look at pitch decks. Lord knows I get sent a lot of them every single day, and they really don't provide any type of good signal for me. So I have to think about what is good signal for me. Signal really comes back to individuals first. The nature of what we do at GrowthX is we don't just write checks and open up our Rolodex. I work with founders for 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year to help them build that playbook. I get into the trenches with them. So I'm looking for people I enjoy working with. So I can't make that decision over 30 seconds. And John kind of alluded to it, but one of the reasons that I'm here is because we believe that help is the best form of due diligence. I get much better investment signal from your market than I actually do from you, but you might not be in a position to get that market signal. So if I can help you get that market signal, and better yet, if we can get to that market signal together, that does two things. It gives me an opportunity to work with you, and it gives me an opportunity to speak with your market. And those are the things that make a good investment signal for me. Right? I want to work with people who share my worldview. I want to work with people who are learn-it-alls and who understand that my time and my expertise is much more valuable than my check size. And that's by the way, a very specific outlook for a venture capitalist. So I'd beware that the advice I'm giving you that relates to GrowthX certainly might not and probably won't relate to a lot of VCs out there. But that's at least for us. And a perfect example just of us sort of living true to our values. I did a workshop just like this one for an accelerator out in Oakland sometime, not too much more before COVID. I said, look, there's the ICP exercise, go and do it. And I sent over the templates. I said, if you have any questions about it, let me know, and I'm happy to take a look. A few months later, founder Julius Nyanda reached out to me. He said, hey, Max, I'm working on it. Mind spending 30 minutes? Let's take a look at it. I said, absolutely, started looking at it. He'd gotten turned down by just about every VC in the Valley, and he'll be the first to tell you, he just thought it wasn't the thing to do anymore. He's like, I just had given up on it. I was attracted not only by the fact that, number one, he had bootstrapped his business, taking a $7,000 severance check and turned it over 2 years into a $2 million business. I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to invest in that founder as an individual, first of all. But second of all, the investment signal from the pitch deck was all wrong, especially to the Valley. If I just looked at his pitch deck, I go, this is a startup for affordable housing, and you're selling to governments. And what's attractive about helping people get into affordable housing from a big VC perspective? If we look at a pitch deck, frankly, nothing. But again, that's a bad signal. When I started working with Julius and I spent a couple of months with him, we were able to realize that let's get in front of your market, and we see that there's a large opportunity. And you weren't pitching your deal flow correctly, which is a great advantage to me because now I have the inside track, right? So, and through that, we're actually invested in them and working with them right now and trying to make affordable housing more accessible to the residents of the Bay Area through technology. Again, that's not in your Gartner Magic Quadrant. That's a very unsexy business with a really awesome founder that we're absolutely excited to be a part of. Then we'd only get to be a part of by helping as a form of due diligence.
That's a great story, man.
Yes.
That's a great story. That's a great story, Max. You know, I get the sense that folks want to just continue this conversation. I don't know how much time you have. There's probably other questions. I did have another one as well, too, just to sort of pick your brain on about the intentionality around capturing data. That speaks to me real specifically. Formerly as a prosecutor, I'd have my team, we ran the homicide division, and we'd always watch when we're selecting the jury. I'd have 3 or 4 or 5 people watching folks, and you try to really understand. And then even in business, going into a meeting with my team, I'm making sure that someone on the team is watching the expressions and writing down the questions that are coming up and really trying to build a dossier around what you've learned in that meeting. I've found that the more you do that, the more you're able to communicate more effectively by taking it down. Or even when you go in and meet someone and they give you a card, I'll forget who that person was on the card that I went through, unless I write a note on the back of the card right after it happened. He said this is cool, it connects to that, and stick it away. Now I can forget about it because there's so many things I need to remember. I need to have a quick way to download data in a way that can be brought back later in an effective way. That's always been the case, and it's a mechanical process. And I just wanted to second what you were saying about finding your own personal mechanical process to download that information as you're going through these calls. And you know, just to really sort of put a thing on that. The question I have is around the MXP Online. So is it your recommendation that all of us, the teams, should go in, and is it a course? Is it a foundational course? Are there components to it? How should we utilize MXP Online in addition to, you know, sharing this recording?
Yeah, absolutely. So for MXP Online, I'll give a little bit of background history on it. So one of the things that makes our fund different is that we don't just invest our capital, we invest our time. And we try and do that in a way that that allows us and enables us to be mutually aligned with the people that we invest in. And so what I did several years ago is I just said, well, what are all the things, what are all the steps that we need to take to bring a company to market? And how do we create a structure around that process that eventually the outcome becomes repeatable, scalable revenue? And when you have that, when you have traction around that repeatable, scalable revenue, then you're at your next market milestone where somebody, it could be us, could be other people, can invest more money to then bring in that sales and marketing function, right? Once I can prove product market fit and I can prove that I have a problem that more money can solve. And by the way, that's what investor readiness is, right? I have a problem that money can solve, right? Once I can prove that tangibly with data, now we have, potential investors for the next round. So the goal of the MXP was just essentially to provide our own founders with an unfair advantage in going to market, and getting them to market faster and getting customers faster. The challenge for us is that, while it's a great form of due diligence, it's very unscalable. It makes it difficult for me to be able to run this program across thousands of startups all around the world. It's just not something that's reachable. We don't feel like it's anything that has to be solely accessible just to companies within our portfolio. So, what we did is we took every step of the program and our experience doing this over hundreds of startups over the past 6.5 years, and we built it not into an academic course, but an actual playbook. So for example, the exercise, that we touched upon with ICP is really just the tip of the iceberg for all of the work that we do in ICP. To actually craft it and make it and come up with multiple ICPs that then eventually you focus one on. And then the next step is you take that ICP and you come up with a customer acquisition strategy. And we don't just say, okay, well, when thinking about a customer acquisition, no, you're gonna craft your next 9 months of customer acquisition strategies. And some of those will be hypotheses and some of those will turn into a pipeline of strategies.
Yeah.
And within each strategy, I'm going to force you to think about what are the resources that you're going to need to put in that strategy. And are those resources available or is it not stage relevant? And going back to the data conversation, every step of the MXP Online is hypotheses driven, and it comes with specific templates that we've used so that you're collecting data, so that you're building a framework to go, okay, well, here are the questions I need to ask. Then I run the test, and coming out of that test, now I collect that information and I see what I can learn from it. And so, for us, I certainly don't always recommend it to absolutely everybody. But if the question comes up, you're looking at how do I get to market? How do I get to market faster? How do I stop improvising it? And specifically as it relates to product market fit, I just haven't seen too many folks go quite as deep on everything that actually leads to ideation to execution. And that's really where the MXP is focused, on intentional execution. There are plenty of tools out there, Lean Stack and Business Model Canvas, that are great, really foundational for ideation, sort of coming up with a couple of different theories. But for testing and bringing a product to market, it's a really great playbook. Comes with, 87 videos, and every single section comes with a case study and a template and, plenty of coaching from me, just like what you guys experienced today. And so, certainly take a look at it, certainly check it out. And, certainly if you jump into it, I'm happy to help you, keep working on some of the exercises with you. Because again, the other offshoot for us is that it creates investment signal. If people are using the MXP Online, I know and I can trust the way in which they're going to market. And it makes that due diligence process even faster for me. And, it's somebody I can say, well, look, they're being intentional about finding revenue, which, make no mistake, there are plenty of people who reach out to me and say, I want to take my product to market. I go, okay, so why haven't you? Right? That's actually a signal, right? You actually go, so what's stopping you from talking to the market? Why don't you have revenue yet? Well, I don't know what to do. That's not really a good enough excuse, right? You have to be an entrepreneur enough to at least, take a few no's here and there. And so, we're trying to look for signals of people who want to do the work and want to learn how to do the work.
Excellent. Excellent. Go ahead.
One quick question. I'm definitely going to go to MXP Online. I'm assuming, because Patrick had put a question in the chat about how can you become a part of GrowthX? Like, you would say the next step would be like MXP Online and like.
Exactly.
Well, not necessarily. I certainly wouldn't want to make it that transactional. And so really what it comes down to is I'm going to follow up with John after this. I'm going to send him the recording. I'm going to send him the decks so that you guys have everything. And I'm also just going to send over the ICP exercise, the templates for that. And, if it's useful, if it's relevant, take a look at it, start working on it. And what, as I sort of talk about with customers, if there's a problem that I can solve or I can be helpful with, shoot me an email, let me know. And I'm actually dropping into the chat right now a link that we always send after the follow-up, just to go, love feedback, love to know what you thought. And, there's a comment section for you to add that. And as well, if there's something that you think that's for us to discuss and it's not just a pitch deck and not just your business idea, I'd love to have that conversation. Because I said, help is our due diligence. So if, and I'll, pick on Julius as a great example. Start putting in the work, start trying this methodology on for yourself. And if it's something where you're seeing results and you're going, okay, let me run something by you. That's a great conversation for us to help and help out with, and a great place for us to get started. The other thing that I'd say, of how do you want to become a part of GrowthX, The other thing is just make sure it's a qualified, make sure it's a qualified opportunity for you. Do some more homework on GrowthX. Make sure that, you know, we don't make it no secret what types of businesses we're looking for, what types of businesses we invest in. And so all the time I just get messages from people after chats like this and like, hey, here's my pitch deck. Let's talk. I just respond with a really simple question. Why me? Why GrowthX? Other than the fact that I was in that lecture, why me and why GrowthX? Why is this a good use of your time? And you'd be shocked how often people do a lot of work to try and convince me that's a good use of their time. And then I take that meeting and it's like, great, you're a B2C hardware company with zero revenue and you don't even have a prototype. And if you just read my website for 5 minutes, you would see like, this is either directly competitive to something I've invested in or so, you know, it's just, we can have a great conversation about being a part of GrowthX, but just like you would do with a customer, make sure that we share the same worldview, make sure that it's going to be a good use of not just my time, but more importantly, your time. I don't care if you're talking with investors or customers, both of them have ideal customer profiles. And so something to think about as you guys are, if you're thinking about raising venture capital money, is not only whether or not you should raise venture capital money, which is, and I don't think is discussed enough. You know, I might not be the best form of capital for you to raise from, but you want to look for people who, venture capitalists who share your worldview. That could be people who invest in your stage. That could be people who invest in your industry. That could be people who invest in your geographic region, whatever that might be. And trust me, I speak with dozens of accelerators every day. There's an accelerator for everyone. And unfortunately, most founders just start email blasting 500 startups and Andreessen Horowitz and, you know, and Sequoia Capital just because they're the big brand names out there. You'll do so much better if you reach out to people who share your worldview. And you know, and you don't have to convince them that whatever you're working on is a fit for their fund and their fund thesis and their fund model.
Yeah. Well, that was Patrick's question. I can probably just send an email. I don't want to keep you for too long because the question I had was really about like to use that example in the pitch that you gave with the company that Aptology or just that I was curious about like the process of testing, and because that's a product that really could go to any industry. And you know, I think you talked about that, like there's a huge you know, TAM, but they have to start somewhere to like, you know, prove that fit like within an industry. And then like, you know, maybe there's something that they test and they realize, oh, this doesn't work too well and they have to make a change. And then, you know, so like, how is that, I guess, how are you communicating about your product before you really have that chance to really test and know that it works across different industries? You know, or do you just market to a specific industry, say this is something that's for the airline industry because you've tested it there, you know it works there, but it could look different in another industry, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Aptology, again, it could have been applied anywhere. So rather than testing, which is an expensive way of learning, we sit inside the building and we just go through a variety of thought exercises to think about what would on paper make the most sense. And you go really, really deep. And the questions that you're asking for, again, is who is Mr. and Mrs. right now, right? So you think about, you know, all the different roles you could hire for, and let's just start whittling things down, right? So a software developer or a product developer, those people in the hiring process take tests. They have certifications. It's not a hiring process that is subjective. It's highly objective, right? There are a variety of roles where they aren't hiring just based off of gut feeling alone. So I take all those roles, I throw them out. Okay, now what are the roles that are the most subjective? Well, sales is one of them, right? But again, you have a whole lot of different sales roles. So then I'm looking for what's the right type of sales role, right? I could say, well, CEOs, could be could be a fairly objective hire. I mean, at the end of the day, what does a CEO really do? Well, that's not a big market, right? And at the end of the day, would people really want to use behavioral analytics to be hiring one person within their company? I mean, that's only doing one sale. So that doesn't really seem attractive from a business model standpoint. But a lot of companies out there have 100+ salespeople. So I have a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of problems there, right? So what it gets, and then I start looking at salespeople, and I explained before, okay, well, let's look at what the salespeople are selling and the ticket value of it. Am I selling $40 jeans or $400,000, $400,000 technology software, right, to an enterprise? Well, what goes into selling a $400,000 piece of technology? A lot of training, a lot of sales technology. And still, whether you're hiring the person who's selling jeans or you're hiring the person who's selling enterprise technology, there actually isn't much of a difference, right? There isn't much of a difference in the way they're evaluated, but the downside is enormous, right? The risk factors are way higher. So and we did all of this, by the way, just inside the building before we ever talked to anybody. We just thought it through. This is what I go back to with curiosity and empathy and business acumen. The first step does not need to be test. Let me go out and talk with people. That's actually improvising, because what are you testing? What's the expected result, right? You don't want to test and just say, well, what do you think? A test should be, here's what I think, and I expect you to agree. And if you don't, ooh, that's interesting, tell me why. That's a test, right? A scientist doesn't take two chemicals and put them in a beaker and light them on fire and then say, my expectation is that stuff will happen, right? They say, no, what I expect is the weight's going to go down and the temperature is going to go up and then a specific type of gas, right? So you need to get into that level of detail inside the building. And the reason why you want to do it inside the building is because it is so expensive and time consuming and costly to do it out there, right? You can be in total control inside the building, and you just need to take the time. And by the way, that's the hack. That's the trick. People ask me, do you have any hacks for, shortening the path to product market fit? This is it. Don't go outside the building and ask a bunch of questions of people who aren't qualified to answer them, right? Build a business case, build a use case hypothesis, and then see if people agree with it, right? A great example is when you're trying to pilot technology with companies. And oftentimes entrepreneurs kind of come into a company and they say, well, tell me what's the best way to work with you. And the corporation will say, tell me what's a great way to work with you. It's kind of that Spider-Man meme where they're both pointing at each other. You as the entrepreneur, it's your job to protect your company at all costs and only put your technology or your service or your business in a position where it's going to be successful. And only you know where your product or service is going to be successful. So you can think through that yourself and then try and get people to see the light.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. This whole session, John, this has just been incredibly helpful, so timely. Thank you.
I'm so glad. That's awesome. Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, Max, it really is. I appreciate your time, because obviously we took a lot of it, and that you went, gave us a little insight into your world as an investor and how you think and how you would approach companies. I think that's a nice thing also to share, because a lot of us don't have that experience to sort of even begin to think that we know and how we would go. So that was very kind. The third is that you just come across very approachable and very thoughtful, and like you actually care about these kinds of folks and these kinds of businesses that we're involved in. And so there's a sense of integrity around what you're trying to do. If I'm not your match, then we should both know that. So instead of just kind of sucking the wind out of just to be able to grab everything and see where the opportunities are. And lastly, you know, we're all of us in this call, all of the teams in this cohort. I mean, this is all about relationships. You know, this town and this country hadn't been so easy on Black founders as it relates to finding money or finding mentors or finding assets or getting advice that is, you know, unfiltered and honest and caring. So it's appreciated that you would offer it that way. And I'm sure I speak for everybody that, you know, it matters. And so you can come into this town and helicopter in from San Francisco and, you know, give away fairy dust all day long, and people aren't going to take it here. They're like, you know, it's about trust and relationships. We've been through too much crap for too many years, too many decades to have anything else. And so we're trying to make that kind of awareness and statement on our behalf, on our own behalfs with this program. And so having you present this way was refreshing, and among the sessions that we've had so far, this is absolutely one of the best. So I just wanted to put that out there, share that with you. I know my partners here on this call. I see their faces. I know that this is hitting the right chord for all of us, and no one is here that would be out of anything other than the sense that there's got to be something good. We're all here to try to find that out, and it's important that, you know, it's in line with our worldview. And so I appreciate your time on that. And I just wanted to close with those remarks and say thank you again.
Well, thank you, John. That really made my day. You actually just unintentionally, and I keep this right here next to me. You just hit, these are our core values. I keep it over my head most of the day. You just hit like 7 of them, which which really made my entire day. I really appreciate that. And I enjoy it, honestly. You know, if my job is to sell GrowthX as somebody who hands out checks, I do that through helping, right? We say help is our due diligence. And so we just want to be helpful. This is not information that everything that we covered, I didn't create it. I don't take credit for creating it. I just put it in an organized fashion for other people to digest. And there's no reason why it should be locked up, you know, behind a paywall somewhere, or locked up, you know, here in the Valley somewhere.
Yes.
Cisco only has so many problems. Sometimes it feels like a lot, but, you know, I oftentimes equate founders to artists, and artists are inspired by the community and the environment around them. The same thing is true with entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs shouldn't have to come to San Francisco to be closer to their capital. They need to be in their community where they're closer to their problems and their customers. And that's just what we want to try and help entrepreneurs do, is don't come here, stay where you are and make an impact.
Let's take it home with that. Appreciate you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody.
You will be hearing from us again. Thanks again, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.